Coming up on Theater Talk.
I was going to be a minister, and then I discovered girls and beer, and and decided against
it. And that went down the tubes.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation. Okie doke from New York City. This is Theater Talk. I'm producer Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post.
You know Michael. I have seen a fabulous new musical, Scandalous. And we're going to talk about
Well, it's about a woman that you're obsessed with, Aimee Semple McPherson.
McPherson,
yes.
My friend Kathie Lee told me it's McPherson.
McPherson, Aimee Semple
Who was a person.
Spoken like a true lyricist. Right. There is a fine new musical on Broadway called Scandalous about Aimee Semple McPherson. It stars three of the best performers we have in the musical theater: the beautiful Carolee Carmello, the beautiful Roz Ryan,
thank you,
and the handsome, stunning Broadway legend George Hearn.
Our hunk. Love him. We have a couple of hunks in our show, and he's our resident hunk.
And they brought along with them this woman. We're going to have a little trouble probably getting her to talk and enjoying it here. When I think of the great writers of musical theater, I think of Richard Rodgers and Larry Hart and Alan J. Lerner and Kathie Lee Gifford.
It's so silly. It really is.
Who has written Scandalous?
Well, with some help, of course. Nobody does theater alone, and that's really the beauty of theater. I love the collaboration of it all. But it does start with one person, for me, a legal pad and a pen. That's the way I write. And we have two fantastic composers that I've worked with all along on this.
They are?
David Pomerantz and David Friedman. And I wrote one song in the show. It is the finest song in the entire score, isn't it, kids? It's the Dirty Irish Drinking song that I happen to have in my trunk.
Oh, fabulous. Next time I see you at PJ Clark's, we're going to sing that one.
I have some junk in my trunk.
All right, Carolee, you're playing Aimee Semple McPherson. Did you know much about her before you plunged into the show?
I didn't know anything. I heard about the show when it was being done in a form of a reading about 8 years ago or so. Yeah. I was working on Urinetown on Broadway at the time, and a friend of mine in the cast was doing the reading that Kathie Lee had written, and came to work one night and started describing the story to me. And I was fascinated because I didn't know anything about this woman. And I said to my friend Jim, I said, well, who's playing my part?
And he said,
Christine Ebersole. And I went,
So back then, it was written for two actresses because it's such a demanding role. Yeah. It takes place
on stage the whole time.
Yeah, and it takes place over 20 years. And so I had written it for a young Aimee and a more mature Aimee, and Carolee came to me and said, would you ever reconsider and write this for one actress? And I thought she was crazy. And she said, all my life I wanted to work that hard, for a role like that you're never off stage.
Yeah, it really is the role of a lifetime. I mean, she, in real life, she was larger than life, and there's so much to sink my teeth into, so I can't complain. I dug my own grave here.
Now, Roz, did you know about Aimee Semple McPherson?
I knew absolutely nothing until a friend of mine called and mentioned the show and said that they were going to send me a script, and I read the script, and here's what happened. When I read the script, I jumped on the computer because as soon as I read it, I wanted to know. Yeah. And I called my agent and I said, yeah. Yes.
Now, George, you've been around a bit too. So did you ever go to any of her prayer meetings, Aimee Semple McPherson?
No, but I remember her name definitely.
Yeah,
I mean, in the 40s and 50s, her name was still ringing around America, the way Michael Jackson or somebody of that stature. In the fame machine, she was very, very famous and scandalous.
Yeah. Well, tell us about her, for those who don't know Aimee Semple McPherson.
In a nutshell, she's the most unlikely success story. She was born in 1890 on a farm in Canada to a Salvation Army mother, very legalistic, and a farmer father. And she was an atheist as a young woman, but she was brilliant. Long story short, she ends up marrying an Irish Pentecostal preacher. She falls in love with God and him at the same time, mostly him because he is gorgeous. Long story short, she ends up being an evangelist and a faith healer herself. But she's married 3 times, divorced twice, is the defendant in the trial of the century in 1926, when she famously disappeared for 5 weeks off the coast of on the Pacific coast, and showed up 5 weeks later claiming that she'd been kidnapped and held for ransom. And the district attorney said, not so fast. You were shacked up with your married lover, your sound engineer from your temple in Carmel.
So why need there to be a trial?
Well, because she was charged because 2 people died while she was missing, trying to find her.
Trying to find
her. And so the DA thought, and he was trying to make a name for himself in Los Angeles, as district attorneys are wont to do, and he charged her with corruption of moral, obstruction of justice, and manufacture of evidence because he said it was an expensive and tragic hoax. On the
kind of gal.
Yes. Oh, you loved her, Michael.
Likely it was. But we should say that prior to this, she had built a temple in Los Angeles.
I've been to the temple many, many times, and I just took Carolee. It's an unbelievable experience to go there. It seated 5,300 people at a time, and she would have 5 services on a Sunday with 10,000 packed in with 10,000 people waiting outside of each service to get in. She was the biggest story in Hollywood, the most celebrated, most controversial.
And a radio star.
And the first woman to have her own, that radio station of hers, which she started in 1924.
Still
sold in 2003 for $250 million because it was so powerful. The reach was so powerful. She was a genius marketer. She was a P.T. Barnum of the pulpit, and she was a woman doing all of this at a time when women couldn't vote. She was despised by this guy who represents. It's hard for you, I know, snidely whiplash.
You're the villain. You're the villain in this.
Well, he plays a dual role.
Yeah, the second part there.
Yeah.
But now, Roz, tell us the character you're playing. How does she fit into this?
I play Emma Jo Schaefer. She's a brothel owner, and one of the fascinating things about Aimee,
a real-life character.
Yes,
No, well, sort of.
Sort of.
Yeah. Yes. In real life, I should say, in real life, Emma Schaefer was Amy's longtime faithful friend to the end. But every picture you look at her, she looks like that. Yeah, she was a white spinster whose fiance died before she could marry him. She never smiled for the rest of her life. Followed Aimee, and I said no, that's
Kathie gave
so I made her
soul. No, she gave us
African American brothel.
Do you think she was a charlatan at all, or did she really believe in what she preached?
Well, I think that she really did believe. I mean, we talk about this a lot, especially in the beginning. She really was working too hard to have done this for anything other than true faith. You know, she was traveling around the country, putting up tents, and driving with her mother in a car and her kids, and it was hard work and very little reward. So I think during those years especially, she was really, truly devoted to it. Now, when she got to Hollywood, it was kind of a different animal.
And the money started to come in.
Not so much the money, because she died with only $10,000 in her bank account. It was never about the money. It was about the
fame,
the celebrity, I think.
Yeah, I think she got a little sucked in by that. Yeah.
Now, George, you play a rival minister who brings her down in the second act. Why does he out to get her?
She ruffled a lot of feathers because she came in, if there were evangelists in Hollywood at the time, and he was one of them.
Right.
She's cutting into his turf, and so taking away the people. But also she had a tremendously, I think a lot of people would be put off by motorcycles coming down the aisle and things, and the Episcopalians would say, no. The part that's serious about that said, no, that's not dignified, which is his point. And
what about the naked men and women?
It wasn't
they would act
naked
out
men
scenes,
coming
right?
down the aisles. We got naked men coming down the aisles. I didn't write this.
I did.
But you should have pageants.
Open call. But
Susan's right.
She had production.
This is how genius she was.
Yes.
People who think the Bible is boring have never read it. It's like the Real Housewives of the Old Testament. There is so much. If you want incest, you want betrayal, you want adultery, you want murder, you want blood and lust and guts, it's all there. And so Aimee realized how brilliant it would be to put on pageants and dramatize it and make people realize, wow, these are great stories. So if she was preaching on the Garden of Eden, She was so savvy. She would find the most gorgeous man in Hollywood, the most gorgeous woman, put very strategic little fig leaves on every time Ed Watts walks out in his fig. I go, nice foliage. He's unbelievable. Yeah. And then she would bring in real trees and real animals from the Los Angeles Zoo and put on a show.
Yeah, Ziegfeld. She kind of
this was the days before cable television, so people were, flocking to the temple
Well, yes,
for
you wonder.
entertainment.
And it's funny, though, when you say that she understood that the Bible had all of this sex and all in it, because George Bernard Shaw said of the Gospel according to St. Luke, it reads like a smutty French novel.
Yes, but it has a happy ending.
I was always so fascinated by Aimee Semple McPherson, even before I heard about your show, because she was this woman of such remarkable drive and such remarkable accomplishment, and really just a driven maniac in a certain sense. And I say very respectfully, she reminds me of you.
Oh, yeah. I've been called worse than maniac.
No, but
that's for sure.
But and I
time is it?
I say maniac in the nicest way.
Off the rails, Susan. They can keep going.
No, I have been a maniac about this. That's my family. Amy's second husband was named Harold McPherson, and his name was Mac. And we discovered in all these different productions that our audience lost interest in Mac because Aimee lost interest in Mac. So
yes.
Mac's been basically written out of the show. So my husband goes by the name Mac now because I've written him out of my life. He never sees me. And he'll leave. He sent me flowers the other day. Love Mac. It's
But you said your husband actually saw Aimee Semple McPherson.
Frank grew up in California, a dirt poor Pentecostal family. And I'd been fascinated about her for a long, long time. And I'm talking with Frank and we're first dating. And I said, there's this woman that I just can't get out of my head. He goes, oh yeah, I went to her church. And the truth is, he was 12 years old, and she...
Here comes gang.
It's poor Frank. He was only 12 years old. She sees her coming down the ramp like Carolee does with the chiffon and throwing out the roses. Frank has what any 12-year-old kid's going to have at that point, a visceral, rather carnal reaction to a beautiful woman. He didn't know she was on drugs and dying. He didn't know. He looked good to her. She looked good to him. You know what he said? The truth is, she was so sensual. Yeah. Even though she was a deeply spiritual woman, she combined the sensual. I mean, you read the Song of Songs, Song of Solomon. It's all there. It's incredible, beautiful, erotic poetry.
Sexy poem, yeah.
Very, very much so. So Aimee understood that. And who better than Carolee to play her?
Well, Carolee gets that because when you go online to see tapes of Aimee, you don't get
No,
that.
you don't.
I have come to Broadway, the Mecca of sin, the citadel of worldliness.
You have a religious background, a very strong and powerful background.
I'm not a fan of religion, Susan.
Really?
No, religion to me, and we don't have to talk about that because our show is really not. Religion puts people in chains and binds them up. And true faith is a relationship. It frees you up. So I'm a deeply spiritual person, but I like what Aimee did, and I think this is the other reason I love her so much. She got dirty for her faith. If you really believe in something that says love your neighbor as you love yourself, she did. She went where no nice woman went. She went into the brothels. She went into the bars. She went into the wrestling rink. She went into the anywhere.
I knew her from somewhere.
She's coming to get you at PJ Clark's tonight, baby.
Just to let our viewers know, I first met Kathie Lee at PJ Clark's, where she drank very modestly, but I had a few glasses of white wine.
Shock and awe is the only thing I can.
I've spoken to someone who dated a guy who was at Toots Shores all the time, right? Frank knows that.
Yeah, but he
world.
had to play football, honey.
Since you're all in the musical theater, I do want to ask you a bit about your backgrounds and how you fell in love with this business and how you began. Carolee, can you tell me the first show you saw or heard as a kid that made you think, I want to be in this world?
You know what? I never wanted to as a kid. This was not it's not what I studied. It wasn't my passion. I don't think I even realized as a kid that people could make a living doing theater. I was a business major in college and got my degree in business administration. And as a kid, I think I had some cast albums. I had Godspell and I had West Side Story, but I think just because my parents had them, it was never anything that I never did shows as a kid.
But you had a
voice.
singing voice.
I sang in choirs, but I never, I wasn't like.
She's never had a voice lesson, never had an acting lesson. She is just And I say this with all the deepest admiration and respect. The woman's a freak.
I thought you were going to say a fraud.
No, I say she's from a planet called Marvelous.
Well, how did you go from the business to then doing a show and suddenly realize, oh,
Well, when I was in college, I did a few shows in my dormitory cafeteria, and as a result of that, I sort of got interested in, musical theater as a hobby, certainly not as a career. And I found myself doing a community theater production of The Music Man when I was a senior in college. And a producer from an equity theater saw me and offered me a job for the summer after I graduated from college. And at the time, I was sort of at a crossroads, and I wanted to kind of maybe go to law school, maybe get my MBA, maybe just move somewhere and start working for IBM or something. And when he offered me this job, I was like, well, that'll be fun for the summer. I'll go up to the Adirondacks and goof around for a couple months, and
Can
then
you
I'll
imagine all the actresses that were watching this out
the
there
actors-
gnashing their
actors-
teeth?
would-be actors are watching the show now.
I know, I'm sorry. And I didn't know, so I remember having this conversation. I was standing in my mother's living room, and he called and he said, well, if you do this, you have to join Actors Equity. And I was like, well, what's that? And everyone I tell this story to goes, oh.
Now I hate you.
I have basically the same story. I was,
Do you?
I was a nightclub singer in Detroit.
Yeah.
I was making lots of money being a big fish in a little pond. You didn't know that?
No.
Oh my God.
I thought you'd, no. When do we ever have time to sit around and just talk about?
Never.
Never.
Okay.
So you're singing in Detroit, and you're discovered out there.
Yeah, I was doing, I was working in nightclubs, and I heard someone told me Amos Behaven was in town. They had seen it. I didn't even know to go to the theater to see theater.
Really?
I was a nightclub baby. That was not my world. And I went and auditioned, and Shelton and Richard Maltby came in, and they came to the club, and they saw me sing in the club, and they gave me the job. And 10 days later, I remember my dad bought me this big blue trunk and painted my name on it in gold sparkly. And
Broadway baby.
I know, it makes me verklempt right now. And I came to New York, and
That was it.
that was it.
And now, George, you're a legend in this business. Were you singing as a kid? Were you wasn't being old?
Oh, that means I know I'm old. Don't say how
You
old.
still fine, boo. You still fine.
You don't
He's
understand
still
the
fine.
impact that this man had on me when I came to New York as a teenager to see La Cage aux Folles, and hear George Hearn do "I Am What I Am" was one of the great moments in the history of the musical theater. Were you always a singer, or did you want to?
In the old days before television, my mother played the piano. My dad sang all the old "When Irish Eyes Are Smiling" and all that kind of stuff. Rode the mandolay, sentimental songs, and so we sang around the piano almost every night. And it was wonderful. My sisters and my dad and people used to do that, And my degree's in philosophy. I was going to be a preacher. I was going to be a Presbyterian minister or a forest ranger. Those were my
And now you are a preacher, but not a very nice one.
I'm not much of a forest ranger, but I have a little farm. I live on a little farm up in Kathie, and Kathie brought me back.
Then did you kind of just drift into it as they did too, or did you actively?
I was going to be a minister, and then I discovered girls and beer, and and decided against
And
it.
that went down the tubes.
And you thought, where will I get girls?
Yeah, well, that's it. It's wherever sinners are, as they say. And the theater was where the sinners were, who were girls.
Oh, yeah.
So I drifted, and they started paying me. Well, I had seen, as a child, I had seen the Desert Song. There was like the Muni Opera in St. Louis called the Moat then, and the operettas would come through, and it was extremely romantic to me. The love songs from those shows. Oh, they're beautiful. Student Princess, all of those songs.
I love them.
They're still gorgeous shows.
Those Sigmund
but the
Romans.
books don't work at all,
No,
anymore, so you can't do it. But that's where I fell in love with singing. And I liked Shakespeare. I used to memorize a lot of, as all pretentious kids do. And I was pretentious, even then.
Now, I know, Kathie Lee, you've been in love with the musical theater, since a kid as well. What was it that got you going as a child?
Well, just getting into the business was hearing Barbra Streisand sing People on the radio. Stopped me in my tracks, and I said, I don't know what I just heard, but I know I want to be a part of it. And I didn't know it came from Funny Girl. I didn't know anything like that. But as a child, my mom and dad took us to Shady Grove Music Theater, which was in Gaithersburg, Maryland, theater in the round. And it's always hot. And looking back on it, it must have been awful theater. But you don't know awful theater until you've experienced great theater, you know. But back then, I remember a hot, hot August day, and Camelot was playing, and Guinevere. I was sitting on the aisle, and Guinevere came up and stood next to me, in the zone, in character, waiting to make an entrance. And something about the glisten and the sweat on her arm and her costume up against my leg, and looking at the intensity of her and the sheer beauty of her, and that score. I love the score from Camelot. Anyway, that was it for me. I just thought it was literally, it wasn't the roar or the smell of the grease paint, it was the smell of Guinevere. I wanted to be a part, it just was magical. And I'm, all these years later, I still feel that way. I was honored when I made my Broadway debut in 2000 in a Sondheim show called Putting It Together. Oh, thank you.
Very good in that.
But George was my leading man. I mean, I'm making my Broadway debut in a Stephen Sondheim show, and George Hearn's my leading man.
Yeah.
It made up for all the people who were disappointed when Carol Burnett wasn't in it.
That's right, you were Monday nights, right?
I was Tuesday nights. But then she had a groin injury, and so I took over the last 2 weeks of the run.
I had nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with it.
This is how showbiz.
That's not what she said, George.
That's very good.
Can't beat a good groin injury.
You were wonderful. You were absolutely splendid in that.
You were so sweet to me because I was terrified. I mean, I'd met with Stephen Sondheim at Cameron McIntosh's apartment, and they're trying to talk me into doing this thing, and I'm thinking, I just had, you know, I just couldn't see it. They talked me into it. I go to rehearsals, first time, and I'm doing something with George, and he was so kind, and he goes, "It's as if you've been doing this your whole life." And it meant so much to me. And I said to you, I said, well, in a way I have, just not on this rarefied real estate called Broadway.
Kathie, don't you realize this? He's been using this line for years. It's the girls.
Always worked.
Worked
on Carol.
Still does.
All right, we got to wrap it up. But in honor of our first meeting, Kathie Lee, I brought a little for us all. Where'd the glasses
What
go,
are we
Susan?
drinking here?
Way to a woman's
A very
heart.
good Sancerre, that's it.
All right,
I know
baby.
I know you and
My
Hoda do it.
Boy, you
The
guys,
fancy glasses.
you guys
Very
do
fancy.
these federal funding.
Unfortunately, it's dried up.
Is it Phoebe up?
No, we have to.
This is-
Oh, it's classy.
It's classy. I'll be like the waiter.
When are you coming to see us, Michael?
I'm giving you a little time to settle in. So, I wanted to say though, I heard, and this is what I want to see. Most writers in the musical theater, as you know, they're terrified. They're in the back.
Let me do that while you
Thanks.
talk.
Thank you.
Give it to
You know,
me.
they're in the back and they don't where the audience. Kathie Lee, I hear, goes up and down the aisle and shakes hands and welcomes all the people.
You know what's
And you were so nice to everybody.
I-
I was watching you operate, and I was thinking, not operate.
No, you operate.
But I was watching because you were cordial and focused on every single fan who came up to you,
You
and
have
there
to
were a lot
be.
of them.
I've been in this business for 45 years, and I'm still here because of people like that. And they said, we heard you talking about Scandalous on TV, and we heard Carolee sing, and I got on the first night of previews. I was leaving a little restaurant on our way to, and we thought we'd have a modest crowd, and you know, first night of previews, and our show isn't branded like, you know, so many of them are these days. And I'm walking out of the, I can multitask here. I was walking out of the restaurant, Gallagher's, and Hoda says, look, Kathie, you have to see something. And the line was all the way up the whole block. And as I walked into the theater, people are going, I flew in from Canada. I drove in from Ohio. Just got here from Florida. Did I not tell you that,
No,
Carolee?
you didn't.
I was crying by the, we had a full house.
Yeah. It
The
does
first
help,
day-
it helps to have a popular TV show on which you can
Well-
promote your
Why is it popular?
And
help
it's
Oprah in the color purple.
exactly. And I, you know, I've got a big mouth and I will use it. I try not to shamelessly shield, but sometimes it happens. There you go. I'll let you do the honors
Are you
now.
going to let any other shows come on your show to
Yes,
talk about
you
their
know,
wares? Or?
you know what a huge booster I am of
Yeah, I know,
theater.
I know.
Hoda and I went. It's so funny because Hoda has lived in New
Ladies.
York. Thank you, a long, long time, and worked here, but never gone to the theater. So I said, listen, if we're going to work together, we're going to go to matinee Wednesdays every day, every week, and then we're going to have lunch and go to matinee. And so I took her to the first thing we saw was South Pacific at Lincoln Center. And here you go, baby. And he's singing Some Enchanted Evening. And Hoda looks at me and she goes, that's from this. Then it happened with Patti LuPone when she's, everything's coming. And she was, that's from this. Finally, there's Catherine Zeta-Jones singing Isn't It Rich? And that's her favorite song. She goes, I said, yes, that's from this. And now, of course, she's Ben Brantley. She says, I don't like the arc of that second actor.
Oh, my God. She's giving you notes on your own show. All right, well, here's to Scandalous, a fine new Broadway musical.
Thank you.
Simon Theater.
Bless you.
Roz Ryan, Carolee Carmello, George Hearn, and Kathie Lee Gifford.
Thanks for having us.
And a wonderful
Thank
cast.
you.
Bless you guys.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We'll be first.
To theater.
God, what we had to go through to get a drink here.
As heaven is my witness, Aimee Semple McPherson will lead you straight to hell.
Why you chose a woman is a mystery to me, but a woman who behaves never writes history. This is what I was born for here on the precipice. This is what I will die for, desperately keeping us from the abyss. Help me break the rules if I must. Help me heal them, help me to trust myself.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Eleanor Naylor Dana Charitable Trust, the Alan S. Gordon Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, and the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.